Thank you all. God bless you. Sit down. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to jump right into our panel because I want to use every minute that we have to get information out, and we're here to talk about our military. How many of you are concerned about our military today? Well, I've got three people here that have spent time in the military, and if we added it all up, it's a lot of time between the four of us. But I'm not going to do any speaking today. I'm going to introduce Vice Admiral Dean Lee. And Admiral Lee spent 36 years in the United States Coast Guard. And if you remember, Admiral Lee was the knucklehead that went to the National Prayer Breakfast in his Coast Guard uniform and spoke at the National Prayer Breakfast and got hammered by the media for speaking in his uniform. But guess what? He was only a 2-star when that happened. The Coast Guard then promoted him to a 3-star. Yeah. Michael Berry is a Marine, and I thought we had to have at least one Marine. See, what is that? Marine Corps mating call. You just heard it right over there. Okay, Michael has got 17 years. He's still in the Marine Corps Reserve, but he is with First Liberty Institute, and every time there's an infringement in the military on people's rights, especially their religious rights, their First Amendment rights, they call Michael, and he is on top of it. And I can't tell you what a privilege it has been to work with him as we help him wherever we can at the Family Research Council to get these people through these infringements on their First Amendment rights. And it's not just chaplains, it's others. And then a man that I've known for probably longer than I've known either one of these guys is Colonel retired Joe Martin. And Joe is a Special Forces officer. He spent 26 years in the military, in the Army. And he worked for me at Fort Bragg, where we were selecting and training the Army's Green Berets. So we've got a good panel up here today, and I'm going to jump right into it. And I'm going to start with Admiral Lee and simply ask you to talk to us for a few minutes about what's on your mind with regards to our military.
Well, General, when I came into the service, I wasn't a saved man. It took a while for me to understand that I needed the Lord. And so when I came to the Lord at age 41, by that time I was a mid-grade officer, and I started praying in the chow hall whenever I'd sit down with my crowd, and I never thought anything about it. Underneath, behind the scenes, though, there was a movement going on by some nonprofits, one particular nonprofit group called the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, that was putting pressure on men and women of faith in the military services to kind of leave that at home. I never paid any attention to it until I had been selected for Admiral, and I went to this executive development course they call Capstone. And I'm at the Pentagon one afternoon, and there was a 2-star Major General from the Air Force. I can't remember his name, but he had finished giving us a briefing. And there's 48 1-stars from all the services in the room. And at the end of his briefing, he said something, because he had a little bit of extra time, that I will never forget. He said, "Gentlemen, I'm retiring next week." He said, I was where you are 5 years ago, but this is my last opportunity to address all the incoming newly minted general and flag officers coming into our 5 branches of the service. He said, "I want to leave you 2 pieces of advice they didn't give me when I was in Capstone." He said, "Thing one, you have to be absolutely apolitical in everything you do." Well, we all kind of understood that. You don't get to the rank of general or admiral by voicing your politics. But then he said, "Thing two, leave your religion at the door. Don't bring that to work with you." Well, when he said that, I wanted to jump out of my seat and say, "General, what did you mean by that?" But it was the last session of the day, and everybody's ready to go home, and I didn't want to be that guy that held the crowd up. So I withheld the question, but I want to ask him, sir, why would you say that? What was the context for that comment? And I'll guarantee you there was one of two things going on. He was either a man who had been suppressed for expressing his faith in the workplace, or he was one who had been on the other end of the spectrum, suppressing people who had expressed their liberty. But no matter what, the seed had been planted for religious freedom, fear thereof. And so my biggest concern right now is that still exists. That still exists in the military armed forces. They want us to leave this at home. Don't bring this theology with you into the military work environment, but we want you to adopt and embrace this new religion called wokeology. And that is absolutely antithetical to what is in this book. Over.
Thank you very much. And that infringements on the First Amendment are what keeps this next guy in business. So, Mike, tell us what's on your mind.
Well, thank you, General. I started at First Liberty about 8.5 years ago when I left active duty. And I remember my then boss, my then CO, asked me, he wanted to talk with me before I made the decision to leave active duty. And he wanted to know what I'd planned to do. He knew I was from Texas. I said, I'm going home to Texas. He said, yeah, all you Texans are the same,
All hat and no cattle, right?
So I said, I want to go home to Texas. He goes, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to go and work for a religious liberty law firm. And he said, okay, that's noble, that's honorable. What anything in particular? And I said, well, I'm really passionate about defending religious freedom for our service members. And he kind of looked at me weird, and he just said, well, there's not going to be a whole lot going on. Then you're not going to have much to do because, there's really not much of a fight in that area. And I remember he even said, he goes, well, I'll tell you what, Mike, he said, if I hear of any First Amendment violations happening in the military, I'll let you know. And that was about 8.5 years ago. And I actually was a little bit worried. I thought, where am I going to find these service members? Because I'd done my research, and at First Liberty, we look into these things, and the data right now says that roughly 70% of all of our service members identify as people of faith, predominantly the Judeo-Christian faith traditions. And then they look at, on the recruiting side or the accession side, Americans who identify as highly religious are substantially more likely to join the military than those who identify as non-religious. So that told me something. There are a lot of people in our services who identify as people of faith, and the young people in America who want to join the military are more likely to be people of faith. But I wasn't seeing, and so I said, well, that means people of faith form the backbone of our military. Right? These are the people who are willing to step forward, raise their right hand, swear the oath, and go and do things and put themselves in danger on behalf of our nation. But I was really concerned about what my colonel had said at that time, and I thought, are there going to be enough cases for me, or am I going to be looking for a new job in 12 months? Well, fast forward 8.5 years later, and I was doing a quick scan of my phone while I was traveling, and I just did some. I'm a Marine and I'm a lawyer, so math is not my strong suit. But I was averaging between 60 and 80 messages per hour during normal working hours, just from service members related to this DoD, the Department of Defense COVID-19 vaccine mandate, where they're now telling so remember, 8.5 years ago it was, are there going to be enough cases and clients for me to actually have a job? 8.5 years later, 60 to 80 per hour are telling me the military is forcing me to choose between my faith and serving my nation. Right? They're telling me, the law requires the military to allow somebody to request a religious exemption from the vaccine mandate. And they're being harassed, intimidated, bullied, threatened by their commanders, probably very much like the one that the Admiral talked about, saying, leave your religion at the door. If you want to serve in the military, don't bring your religion here. Yeah, we know what the law says. The law says we have to allow you to request a religious exemption. Sure, you can try. It's never going to get granted. And when it gets denied, you can't make this up. Email after email where they've taken screenshots of messages they've received saying, if you seek a religious exemption, we're going to immediately initiate proceedings to separate you, court-martial you for failure to follow an order. So, the last thing I'll say is I know that the men up here on stage with me they certainly understand this better than anyone else, but for the rest of you who may not know this, when an American service member swears an oath, there are two types of oaths. There's the oath of enlistment, and then there's the officer's oath. And there's a really important distinction between them. The oath of enlistment includes, I will obey the orders of those appointed over me, right? Superiors, superior officers, etc. The officer oath does not contain that. It only says, I swear an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. And I thought about that, and I thought, why is that? Why? That wasn't a mistake, right? They deliberately left that out from the officer's oath, and it's because our only oath of loyalty is to the Constitution. And the day might come when somebody issues an order that we recognize is in violation of the Constitution, and it's our solemn duty and obligation as officers to say, stop. That's not right. That violates the law, right? You're trampling over somebody's rights. You can't do that. And not only do we have the right to not follow unconstitutional orders, we have an obligation to not do that. So that's what I'm passionate about.
Thank you. Colonel Martin. We've seen probably the greatest foreign policy failure in the history of America back in August as we pulled out of Afghanistan, which left 13 of our people dead. How about shedding some light on how we got there? What do you think has contributed to that abysmal failure?
Thanks, sir. I don't believe we have a competent leadership capable of doing strategy anymore. Sun Tzu advised us that you should know your enemy. And I want to put this in the context of two countries. Afghanistan is one. The service members who are on the ground working with the Afghan army could have told you that it would collapse. If you read Ernest Hemingway, you'd know that he said, the Afghans will fight, it is their métier. But when you dig a little deeper into that, you look at the Afghan national pastime, and it's changing sides. And that's exactly what we witnessed. With respect to China, Mike talks about free speech. In the military, when you do doctrine, we are required to use terms. We have a Department of Defense dictionary that limits what language we can use in doctrine and how we evaluate things. And one of the words or terms that's not included in the joint DoD dictionary is unrestricted warfare. Now, several years ago, 2 Chinese colonels wrote a book called Unrestricted Warfare. And effectively, it described China's strategy on how to defeat a major enemy without firing a shot. And unrestricted warfare implies or includes things that we would consider war crimes like poisoning the well. But if you stop and look at the actions of China across the board and the fentanyl deaths in this country, you'll understand that China is poisoning our well, killing our citizens, and no one's talking about it. But our military leadership is unable to even discuss this in a competent forum or lay it out in a doctrine because we haven't allowed it in that DoD dictionary. Now, when I served on the Army staff, I fought to get that term added to that dictionary, and there was tremendous pressure, and it just wouldn't go anywhere. It wouldn't happen. And we can't even look at this. And so the financial warfare that's being unleashed against our country, China is trying to become a world reserve currency, and their efforts to undermine the United States as the petrodollar. those aren't addressed by the military because those are outside the purview of the Department of Defense. Well, we need a Department of War that understands that war is being unleashed on our nation. And we are incompetent strategically to address that threat if we can't even discuss it.
You made an interesting point, and let me just follow up on that. You talked about the treatise that was written by these two Chinese colonels. You can find this online, folks. It's called Unrestricted Warfare. And what they do is they tell us exactly how they're going to take over America, how they're going to defeat us, how they're going to subjugate us. The thing about it is, there's two other groups that have done exactly the same thing, and we haven't paid attention to them either. One of them is called After the Ball. Anybody ever read it? After the Ball. It's the LGBT community telling us how they're going to take over America. And the other one is called The Naked Communist. It's by the Marxist movement in America. How they're going to take over America. I challenge every one of you that are here, and especially those of you who are watching us online, to read those books. Because they tell you how they're going to take over this country. And we haven't paid attention to them, and that's what you said. We haven't paid attention to them. Admiral, wokeism. What do you see happening there? What's the effect of that? What does that do to our military?
Well, first off, I retired in 2016, and I'd never heard the word woke until...
Had you ever heard the word white rage?
I never had.
Never heard.
And
anybody here ever hear of white rage, by the way?
I have now.
The only person that has was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley. I guess he's the only one that's ever, he probably coined the term so he could use it at a congressional hearing and impress somebody.
Right. So yesterday I called up I went to Dr. Google and I called up to see how many new words they've invented under this umbrella of wokeology. And here, I'll just read down a few of them. Cisgender, cultural appropriation, identity group, inclusivity, indigenous people, birthing people, microaggressions, intersectionality, gaslighting, marginalization, systemic oppression, gender binary, heteronormativity. I could go on and on and on.
Don't, please.
And the whole point in this is our military leaders, those men and women who are now in positions of command and leadership throughout all now 6 services, now that we have Space Force, have some tougher hills to climb than the general and I did when we were on active duty, because we didn't have to deal with this. But now they do. And all of these ideologies are encroaching upon the workforce in the U.S. military. And this is my point. The point I want to leave you with is this. For the last 4 decades consecutively, every 2 years, the Gallup pollsters go out into the nation and they poll people to find out what their trust factor is for our 10 top major U.S. institutions. And every single time they take that poll, the most trusted institution in the United States is not the church, I'm sad to say. They come in second. It's the U.S. military. And you have to ask yourself, why is that? And it's because for each one of our services, when we are indoctrinated, when we go through our session points, whether it's academy or boot camp, they hammer home into each and every one of us the core values of honor and integrity. Every single one of them. And now what's happening is, as this tsunami breaks upon their heads, and they're trying to hold up these core values, they're in a battle against, as the bishop said before us, against Satan himself. Because all of these things that fall, you can name them, critical race theory, the LGBT movement, they're all tools of the devil. And every single one of them is trying to divide us into identity groups. And that's the last thing you want in your military armed forces, is different teams when they ought to be all one team. There's 2 colors. There's blue and there's green. No other. Over.
Can I say something about that? I'm so glad you brought that up, Admiral, because I said before that 75% of our military are identify as people of faith. And that's actually the target. That's who is being targeted. And we have evidence of this. A few years ago, we uncovered a Department of Defense training manual. It was produced by the Department of Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute, DOMI. And in this training manual on extremism, they have an entire chapter dedicated to how to identify extremists in the military. And I've read it so many times, I can actually tell you verbatim what it says about who are the extremists in the military. And I'm going to give you this quote verbatim. Nowadays, instead of dressing in sheets and publicly espousing hate messages, most extremists will talk about things like states' rights, individual liberties, and how to make the world a better place. And I said, I thought that's why we joined. Right. And then another section in that paragraph talks about historical examples of extremism in the military. And it said, the colonists who sought to free themselves from British rule. This is produced by the Department of Defense. It's no longer available online, surprisingly, or not surprisingly, but and what that really drives at, I said that's the target, right? It's people of faith. And as we know, we use this term in the military, special trust and confidence, right? We have to have a special trust and confidence. And as the Admiral said, the American public still holds the military in high esteem and still considers the military one of its most trusted institutions. But what's happening with this vaccine mandate and the woke ideology and the extremism training is what's happening is we're being eroded from within. Most of the people I talk to now who are dealing with this vaccine mandate, the most disturbing and scary part about what they're telling me is they say, Mike, I'm willing to fight this to save my career. They said, but I got to tell you, I'm not sure it's worth it. I'm not sure I want to stay in a military that no longer has our best interests and the country's best interests. That's a national security issue waiting to happen and waiting to erupt. If we start to see that kind of talent exodus and we start to see our best and our brightest in our military lose trust and confidence in the institution in which they have sworn their oath and in many cases their lives to serve, that's extremely dangerous.
Amen.
Thank you. Let me ask a question to this audience. If this president and this Secretary of Defense wind up court-martialing people that won't take the vaccine and putting them out with a bad discharge, a dishonorable discharge, which essentially takes all of their rights as a citizen, how many of you moms and dads out there want your son and daughter to be in the military like that? I don't see any hands. For the record, for those of you who are watching online, there's nobody raising their hand. That's a problem. When you don't have moms and dads that could be excited about their son or daughter going into the military. I know my mom and dad were so proud when I joined the military in 1970. Came out of Virginia Tech with a commission in the infantry, and they were so proud of me. So encouraging. If this nonsense keeps up, we're going to have a nation there's going to be moms and dads all over this country that are not going to want Johnny and Janie to serve in the military. And what we're going to wind up with is we're going to wind up with a mercenary military. That's a harsh statement, and I realize that. But we're going to wind up with a mercenary missionary. If you, that 70% that identify as Christian, whether they're practicing or whatever they identify as Christian, if we let that erode because of what we're talking about here on this stage today, we're going to wind up with a mercenary missionary, and that is not what this nation needs. So I'm going to ask you, leadership is obviously a problem, and you said that earlier. But how do we fix it? How do we restore leadership with integrity, with focus, that understands As Douglas MacArthur said in the mess hall at West Point, to the cadets, your mission remains determined, fixed, inviolable. It is to win the nation's wars, period. How do we get back to where we have leaders that understand that's their mission and they stay focused on that instead of all this wokeism?
Sir, I think you'll agree when we say leadership by example is the key, and we have yet to see that. And that remains a serious challenge. If a soldier were to lose a rifle, he would be court-martialed and charged for it. But if a general loses a war, he's rewarded with book deals.
Did you say that again? Speak up. Speak a little louder. Say that again.
If a soldier loses a rifle, he's court-martialed. But if a general loses a war, he's rewarded with book deals. That holds serious implications. And in terms of restoring leadership, the people who are general officers now served for 8 years under the Obama administration and then 4 years under the Trump administration, where he never really the single biggest failure, I would argue, is personnel. And so he did not choose the right people to surround him, starting with the relief of Mike Flynn and the replacement with H.R. McMaster and other general officers that were around him, with the exception of Keith Kellogg. Never got the general officer corps that he deserved or should have had to support him to fix this. And we're continuing to see that now. So the leadership is going to have to start from the top. It's going to have to pivot on the 2024 election, and I hate to hang our hat on that, but whoever replaces President Biden, whether he gets a second term or it becomes President Harris or, God forbid, I mean, folks, we have to face a reality. This can happen.
Dude,
right?
You were doing okay until right then.
Sir, I went to the Special Forces schoolhouse. Someone ran it, and they taught us you have to plan for the worst case. And this is what we as a nation have to plan for and prepare for. And what are we going to do? This is the absolute worst that could happen. What do we do to avoid that? And what do we do if it does happen?
Admiral, what do you think we've got to do?
Well, tagging on to what he said, first off, there was some members on President Trump's staff that I held in the highest esteem. General Kelly, General Mattis are two of them. Highly respected officers who devoted their entire service lives to their country. When I was selected for my third star, they send us the last executive development course, leadership course, if you will, that any military officer will ever go to, is this thing called Pinnacle. And it's a very small group of people that from that group, they will eventually pick their 4 stars and their service chiefs. But of all of the speakers that came in during that week-long session where we were in Suffolk, Virginia, there was one in particular that I will never forget. And it was a retired 3-star who had been on President Bush's staff. And he came down to talk to us about that dance that the senior military officials have to do with the elected officials who oversee us. And at the end of that conversation, we talked about a lot of things. We talked about General MacArthur and Stan McChrystal and a lot of generals who had gotten crossways with the commander-in-chief and ended up being fired. At the end of the conversation, though, he looks at us all and he says, "Gentlemen, you need to be thinking about what principle, what issue you would be willing to throw your stars on the table for." And that's what we need to breed into our officers, our upcoming officers, is that it is service above self. Stop fearing your next promotion and start being willing to throw your stars on the table on principle and doing the right thing. Because first and foremost, our military services exist to win the nation's wars, not to be a petri dish for social experimentation. Over.
So, Mike, you talked a little bit about the mandate. Where is this going? What are your thoughts on where this is going to wind up? What are we going to do? I mean, dishonorable discharges?
Well, I mean, I don't want to get down into the minutia and mechanics of how the military discipline process works. Let's just put it this way. First Liberty Institute, we are going to do everything we can. We are tired of Dunkirk. We're ready for Normandy.
Yeah. Amen.
And in terms of military-wide, what do we need to be doing? Well, look, I love football, okay? And so everything in my mind, again, I don't do math well, but I can think about football. So
you look like a football player.
Yeah. You know? I get that all the time.
I messed you up.
My kids say I look a little bit like The Rock, and my wife says, "No, kids, your dad's the Pebble." So, if my wife is watching, that one was for you, babe. Okay, back to what I love football. And when your team is struggling, as some of my teams are, what does the coach do? We need to get back to blocking and tackling, right? Stop with all the trickerations and all the fancy stuff. Let's get back to blocking and tackling. And I feel that is one of the things our military needs to focus on. And if that doesn't make sense, maybe this will. How many of you have seen the YouTube video that went viral comparing the recruiting videos from the Russian military, the Chinese military, and the U.S. Army?
Yeah.
Or the CIA, for that matter.
That's what I'm talking about. What is the Russian military, and what the Chinese military? What are they trying to appeal to? What is the Chinese national government doing on their TV shows? They are. I'm not advocating this. I'm just using it as an example. They're banning anything that portrays men as non-masculine. They only want men to be portrayed as masculine.
Yeah.
And again, I don't want to see government takeover of all of our media, because that would lead us down a different dark path. But so it's getting back to basics, right? Just as you said with General MacArthur saying at West Point, our military exists for one reason alone, and that is to fight and win the nation's wars. And anything that detracts from that must be ruthlessly eliminated.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
To Mike's point about the NFL, this is politically incorrect. I don't see not one female player on the field, and yet no one dies on Sunday. But they're going to force those female soldiers into our elite special operations units and into other high-risk positions where people's lives are at risk.
And here's something I want you to think about. And we're fighting this. Family Research Council is fighting this now, and it's drafting our daughters. We are adamantly opposed to it, and we're doing all we can to fight the whole issue, because in this year's NDAA, there is something in there about drafting our daughters. Well, you stop and think about it. Historically, the draft has placed young men in the infantry, in the Marine Corps, in the Army. They placed them in the infantry because that's where the greatest need is. Your big formations are infantry units. So now what are we going to do? Are we going to draft women and put them in the infantry? Against their will? We're going to do that? We have a law called Violence Against Women. Remember that? We passed this law, and it was not about women at all. It was really about the LGBT community, but we passed this law, Violence Against Women. Now we're going to turn right around and draft them and put them in the infantry and throw them up against an enemy that wants to kill them. You can't have it both ways. You can't say they need to be protected on the one hand and then talk about filling the ranks of our military infantry, our ground units, with women against their will. Women have played a great role in our military, and they still do today. But then when you look at those commercials that you talked about, Mike, these recruiting commercials, you look at them, you have to ask yourself, who are we trying to recruit? Who are we trying to recruit? It is the most disgusting thing that I've seen as I reflect on my military career is these commercials for what we're trying to recruit today. Admiral, is that the kind of people you want to take out on one of your operations?
No, sir. Let me tell you about a man that has exhibited extreme courage within the last 6 months. The kind of men that I would want to serve with, that I would want to follow. Courageous men. There's a young man, a lieutenant colonel named Matthew Lohmeyer. He's an Air Force officer.
Yep.
And he just wrote a book called Irresistible Revolution. I ordered it last week, and I'm almost finished with it. And this young man lost his command because of some comments he made that were absolutely spot on during a podcast. He threw his career on the line to say the right thing. We need to get behind those people who will fearlessly throw their eagles and their stars and their oak leaves on the table for principle. I would encourage you to get that book and read it and make some noise about it, about those kind of things to your elected officials. If the church stands up and gets behind what we are in here to stand for, we can turn the tide on this. But as it stands, we're losing that battle.
Let's go back to what you said about the oath, the officer's oath. I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. And I take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, so help me God. That's the oath the officer takes. And you have a Marine now that stepped out into the unknown and essentially laid his rank on the table. Tell us about Colonel Scheller.
Well, I don't know Lieutenant Colonel Scheller personally. Obviously, he's now reached legendary status, within the Marine Corps and beyond. When somebody asked me for my reaction to what happened to him, the only thing I can say is something inside of him clearly broke. And I think it's because he takes that oath so purposefully and personally. And again, that he's just one of, I believe the current count is 4, right? 4, and I think they're all lieutenant colonels, which is interesting. That at that juncture in your career, you're really kind of at that crossroads, and for the 4 of them to decide, Lohmeyer being the other one, and I think one in the Navy and another one in the Army. So you've got one from each branch, interestingly enough, saying, I'm willing to throw my oak leaves on the table. And, for me personally, you're talking about leadership by example, it was inspiring to me, because I'm going to go out on record right now and say this. When it comes to this DoD vaccine mandate, right, I'm willing to be my own client, my own plaintiff in the law. I'm willing to challenge it. And I have to look at, as you were saying, my career progression, the things that I had sort of envisioned and planned, and I'm saying, you know what? This is the hill for me to die on. For the Department of Defense to say, for the military and the Marine Corps that I love being a Marine. I love the Marine Corps. And for them to tell me, you must choose between serving your God or serving your country, and say, the oath doesn't require me to do that. Neither does the Constitution. You're the one that's wrong, not me.
Final thoughts in our last couple of seconds. Final thoughts, Joe.
Dig deeper into who's funding these organizations that are tearing our country apart. No one's paying attention or targeting these organizations. The founders of Black Lives Matter are self-admitted Marxists. They've told us that on video. Who's funding that organization? When you dig deeper, you'll find out about unrestricted warfare.
Amen. Thank our panel and thank you all for your attention this afternoon. God bless you.